So let's bring in the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Also with us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rose.
So, Congressman, as you know, I'm just a simple country lawyer. Went to Southern state schools. I'm not as smart as those Ivy League boys like J.D. Vance and Ted Cruz and Pete Hegseth, but it seems to me, Matlock would be very, very confused here because we heard that this speech was going to be proving that China influenced American elections, but I got these documents here that talk about how Russia tried to rig the election. This is from Donald Trump's own intel community, and these documents say, well, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read a little bit of it, and I think you'll be real interested in it. It says the Russian government's advancing narratives with U.S. officials and other prominent persons as well as online. These figures, this is the intel community released by Donald Trump. These figures are conspiring to intensify their efforts as the election approaches to orchestrate a high-profile corruption scandal implicating Joe Biden and the Democratic Party at the peak of the 2020 presidential election. Their aim, said Donald Trump's own intel community in 2020, is to defeat the former vice president and ensure the president's victory. Russian actors, listen to this. This is so diabolical, no American would ever consider doing this. Russian actors have circulated narratives about voter fraud resulting from mail-in balloting and called some U.S. primary voting processes rigged by the Democratic Party. I'm confused. I'm a simple country lawyer. This is from the Trump administration talking about vote rigging, which sounds like what the president was doing last night, which they say is what Vladimir Putin was doing. And it reminds me of Marco Rubio and the Intel Committee in the Senate saying that the 2020 election caused a real threat to America's national security because of Russian interference. Now, I don't get it. We were supposed to hear about China. Instead, we have documents that say it wasn't China. It was Russia who interfered in 2020. Can you help us out? Can you help us understand this a little better? Because I'm confused.
Yeah, it is hard to understand, Joe. Look, the president told three huge lies last night. Number one, that our elections are corrupt. They're not. Oh, and by the way, only the election of 2020, which he lost, is corrupt. 2016, when he won, and 2024, when he won, those were fine, no problem. But 2020, when he lost, that one was corrupt.
Can I ask you this? Because, again, I'm a simple guy. Who was president in charge of the 2016 elections?
This is a good one.
Exactly. And to your point,
it was Barack Obama. It was Barack Obama in 24, which was okay. That was sleepy Joe Biden. But the only election that he says was rigged was the one in 2020 when he was president.
Exactly, Joe. So there's that lie, there's the lie, and this is in some ways the most pernicious one. This deep state that the CIA or the FBI tried to keep this information from the president. And you know, we need to say that, of course, because as you point out, it was his CIA, it was his FBI. And the reason that really troubles me is that the intelligence community, Joe, as you know, is full of amazingly patriotic people who get paid an awful lot less than they should to do amazing and dangerous work. And last night you heard the president, and by the way, working with the leadership of our current intelligence community, slag those people off and lie about them. And most importantly, this whole China thing. You read this thing. And by the way, I have with me, the American public can look at this. This is a declassified intelligence community assessment prepared by the Trump leadership in 2020 at the very end of his term, which says that the Chinese, it just says it in black and white, the Chinese did not interfere in the election. Full stop. Did they think about it? Did they do what they always do? do, which is think about whether they can, meet up-and-coming politicians in California or whatever? Yes, but this thing says clearly that it was, as you pointed out, the Russians who intervened just as they did in 2016 to help Donald Trump get elected. So what we saw last night were 3 pernicious lies in the service, and your previous guest, Sky Perryman, made this case very, very well, in the service of creating just enough doubt and anxiety about our elections that when he loses, as he's going to do in November, he can say, well, we've got new evidence of what I told you about in July in Georgia and Michigan, and I have sent armed DSH agents to DHS agents to take control of ballot boxes. Joe, that's the moment that our democracy ends.
Congressman, in the document that you just held up from 2021, we should remind our viewers, because there's so much going on, that the current CIA director, John Ratcliffe, was the director of national intelligence. So he knows. The man who was seated in that audience in the East Room last night and stood and applauded at the end of that speech, he knows it's all nonsense, because here's a quote from that report. Quote, "We have no indications that any foreign actor attempted to interfere in the 2020 U.S. elections by altering any technical aspect of the voting process." That's from that assessment of the Intel Committee in 2021. So you started to get into it there, Congressman, but as we've been saying this morning, this speech was a pretext. He wants the Save America Act passed. I don't think that's going to happen unless suddenly some of these Republicans in the Senate change their minds, which they could. But what do you believe specifically the president is setting up right now? Is he going to use the National Guard? Could he use ICE at polling stations? What do you see coming?
Look, in contrast to 2016, now he has all of the tools of the federal government at his disposal. So let me just sort of play out that scenario. It's 9 o'clock on election night, and he realizes that he's going to lose control of the House of Representatives, which is very likely, and maybe even the Senate, right? And so what he does is he says, I've just gotten a report from the director of CIA or, the director of national intelligence that the Iranians are currently conducting an operation to damage the voting totals in California and Georgia and Michigan, and therefore I have ordered federal agents to take custody to save our elections from the Democrats and whoever it is he's going to pick on, the Chinese in all likelihood, because that's what we heard last night, and they will seize the ballot boxes in order to keep those ballot boxes secure. Now you have ballot boxes being loaded into the back of DHS vans. The chain of custody is lost in those very sensitive locations where, the races could be won or lost by a couple hundred votes. And what do we do? What do we do? The chain of custody is lost. We will never know if that scenario, in fact, plays out, who won the elections. And that is what last night was about, just getting enough of his people. And by the way, I'm pretty familiar with his people because I was one of the last guys out of the chamber of the House of Representatives on January 6, 2021, when his people broke windows, murdered police officers, and went after, members of Congress and senators wanted to hang Mike Pence. That's the level of violence that his loyalists are willing to engage in. And I can't tell you how uncomfortable and tragic it was for me to watch the president lie in the service of that mission and to watch his people, like John Ratcliffe, who I have known for many, many years, just stand by instead of saying, I have some principle, I have some integrity, I'm going to resign. That's the old world. That was really painful to watch.
Well, there are these police officers who died, whose families certainly think that their deaths, their suicides, were directly related to what they endured, and obviously Brian Sicknick dying almost immediately after he had been attacked. I think
these writers
the
claiming
next
they
day,
wanted to hang Mike Pence.
Yeah, hang Mike Pence
and to commit violent acts.
Else. David Rode, it's fascinating. Two people last night that were standing up, and I will say I do want to be careful about CIA Director Ratcliffe because of all of Donald Trump's aides. He has, in many ways, from people inside the agency, he's done a pretty good job of holding the line on Ukraine and other issues. But you just heard about Director Ratcliffe in his other position, understanding that there was no evidence, as the congressman said, that China was doing anything to swing the election in 2020. But you also had Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was running the Senate Intel Committee. And they concluded in an after-action report from 2016 that Donald Trump's 2016 campaign posed, quote, a grave counterintelligence threat because of its openness to Russian influence. And I won't read it again, but, you know, the only thing that was proven last night by documents released were that it was the Russians, in fact, that were actively trying to influence the campaign in 2020 based on the documents the White House released, based on Donald Trump's administration in 2020. All of these things, I mean, the calls are all coming from inside the House that are damning for what the president tried to prove last night.
Yeah, it's so hard to cover this because, and I feel, you know, for the American public, and I just want to say the clearest explanation I have for what's going on. And I'll talk about Ratcliffe in 1 second. But this speech, to me, just shows how desperate, delusional, and dangerous this administration, this president is becoming. Just on Ratcliffe, I think he owes an explanation to the American people. This is a public document. This is his dissent that he put out in January 2021 after the election. And the main point he made was that he believed that the effort to shape, not to interfere, not to change votes. There's no mention in this document from John Ratcliffe that China tried to or changed any votes in the 2020 election. John Ratcliffe simply made the argument that the Chinese effort to influence the operation through propaganda and bots online was larger than the broader assessment that Representative Himes was just talking about. And that dissent is actually in this document. It's actually public. And so if there's anyone who should be held account now, whether it's by President Trump or if he testifies before Congress, it's John Ratcliffe. He either allowed this giant plot to happen where all this was hidden from the president, he is a member of the deep state, or he did not. And which one is it, Director Ratcliffe? Were you part of a deep state plot that hid from the President of the United States that China was doing all these nefarious things? I don't understand it. He's got an incredibly powerful position, and I don't understand how he's trying to use it. And then I have a couple documents I want to talk about as well, but I don't want to talk too much this morning.
Well, Rev, I've got to say, there are disagreements, and if John Ratcliffe saw Chinese influence in there, I personally am glad that he wrote that dissent to suggest, and I don't know Ratcliffe, I maybe spoken to him one time on the phone for about 5 minutes, but if somebody has a dissent, I put it in there. I think that's a good thing. But the fact is, nobody here is saying that we should not be alert to Chinese influence on our elections. They may try to do it again in 26 or 28, just like Russia has tried to do it in 16, 20, and 24. So I'm glad they're staying alert to that. At the same time, there's just no evidence of what Donald Trump was saying last night.
No, there's no evidence, and I would raise the question that if this was available to the president, did he discuss this with Xi when he went and visited China not that long ago? It seems to me that this is just something to discourage people from believing the results of the midterm elections, which are likely to go Democratic. My concern is that what will the Democrats do to make sure that people do not feel that it's useless to vote? How will they defend the fact that they may try to, as Congressman Himes have said, confiscate and hold some of the election returns? And how do we beat back that kind of cynicism where people feel it's of no value to vote? So, Congressman Himes, is there a plan in place, or would you suggest a plan that would, in fact, say to people, don't be discouraged, come turn out anyway? Yes, we know they're trying to act like everything is rigged, but these are going to be safe elections, and we'll protect your vote, even if they try to, as has been suggested, try to, in some ways, take some of the ballots and hold them.
Yeah, well, thanks, Reverend. Look, there's a political answer, a partisan answer to that question, which is one thing that the Democratic Party needs to think about doing is making the win too big to rig. In other words, get people out there. The polling very much indicates the level of energy. But then if you set aside the partisan stuff, which we should in this conversation, the American people need to be constantly reassured that it is safe for them to go to vote, that it is illegal. It is illegal for federal officers who are armed to be anywhere near a polling place, and that no matter what the circumstances are, they've got the right to go in there and vote. We need to keep saying something that is also 100% true, which is that, because this is the underlying lie here, apart from the sort of Chinese interference thing, which is that foreigners do not vote in our elections. You know, conservative groups like Cato and Heritage have done the studies, and they've showed that in billions and billions of votes cast in this country, a handful, literally a handful, single or double digits, foreigners have voted in this election. And then, of course, we got the work to do with which you are so familiar, making sure that we are witnessing at the polls, that we're recording everything that happens peacefully without antagonism. Right. We got to remember that Donald Trump would love nothing more than to have a scuffle, a fight or something at a polling place, because now all of a sudden you've got law enforcement there. Now all of a sudden you've got chaos, and that's exactly what Donald Trump wants.
Ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, thank you so much for coming on this morning.